Well, it's a personal leak of mine. I've not really done it since I actually said it to you, but is I have a tendency to make too small, milky kind of bets on a turn after making a small bet on the flop.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, like an interesting way to kind of alleviate myself of said leak is perhaps to look at situations where you are supposed to do that. So that so I can recognize when I'm in a situation where I'm not supposed to do that.
Yeah, there are some fairly well-known ones of where you're supposed to go big, like for example on very wet boards where the pre-flop defender check calls in a spot where they're going to check raise all their really strong hands for protection slash
Protection
equity
and
denial.
equity semi bluff, yeah.
Yeah, then when you get a brick on the turn that doesn't compete any of the draws that they might have played that way, typically you see a big bet now, because the imposition player has the polar range of they've got lots of trash, but also lots of very strong hands, and the defender has a condensed range. They're missing the strong hands because they would have check raised those on the flop, and they're missing the weak hands because they would have check folded those on the flop. And a big bet really puts pressure then on their condensed range. So that's one fairly common heuristic. So this is an example you sent me. Let's just switch to strategy and go back earlier. So what's happened is the hijack has opened this range.
Yep.
And then the big blind defends this range, all the green stuff. The flop comes a very wet 4-3-2. We do a quick range by range comparison at this point. We can see that the hijack has just a range advantage right across, except at the very top they come together because of the flushes. In fact, straight flushes top of the range for both players. You can see that equity advantage for the hijack, more really strong hands, more good hands, less weak hands, less trash. So just kind of a general range advantage. So therefore, if we switch back to strategy, big blind is not going to do any betting, and it makes sense for the hijack. They have some checks. They can't range bet because the board is so wet, and also at the very top, the big blind still does have some strong hands. But for the most part, we're using the small size, either 20% or 38.2%. I think in practice, I would probably just standardize this to something in between, maybe quarter pot.
Yeah.
But anything in that range is going to be fine. And then big blind facing that bet is going to do a certain amount of folding, a lot of calling, and some raising as well, because they do have the very strong hands that want to raise, obviously. So then we go to the turn and we get the jack of clubs. Now, if you look at the range by range breakdown, you can see what's happened on the jack of clubs. Still range advantage for the imposition player. They still have more best hands because the big blind didn't check raise. They still have more good hands as well, and weak hands and more weak hands and trash hands. A lot of the draws in the big blind's range have now got discounted because there's only one card to come and they haven't hit their draw, so the value of the draw is effectively halved, and that's where the weak hands and trash are mostly coming from. So when we look at the strategy, big blind checks, and the hijack is mostly using this size. This isn't a spot where it really makes sense to go too polar. We're just kind of mostly pushing equity here. Anytime you have a stronger range in general, rather than a polar range, you generally using a smaller sizing, and this is why this particular sizing is being used.
So when I've got a lot of hands that I want to get value from, that's when I want to continue with the the second
again,
small.
You can I think, well, at least for me, the easiest way to see this is just we have range advantage kind of across the board, so we just want to bet and keep keep in the hands. Pushing equity is what this is generally referred to. We're just pushing the fact that we have higher equity and we're trying to get more money in. So we don't. It doesn't really make sense to go very big because the big blinds range isn't super strong. So if we bet big, all we'll do is we'll reduce their calls to the top part here, and they do actually have some very strong hands as well. So we don't really give them a difficult decision with their middling type hands here. Like when we do bet, let's look at the response. When we do bet, say 33%, the big blind has to call. Well, these are all flushes, but you know let's look at the 4x. They can't fold a 4. Well, they can fold some of their worst 4s, but they have to call a lot of 4s. They have to call a lot of 3s. They should be calling a lot of 2x as well. If they're folding all that, they're going to be overfolding to this size. So it makes it easy for them to get it wrong. A lot of players will just, they'll call once with, say, well, 5-2 suited. I guess they're always going to call twice with, but they'll call once with ace-2, let's say, and 8-2. And then when they face the second bar, they think, oh, well, now I just have to fold. But they're actually overfolding if they're folding all those 9-2s, 8-2s, 7-2s, etc.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's going on there. Whereas if we take a very different example, let's make this Jack 10, 8.
Right. So this would be a range advantage board as well for the pre-flop aggressor.
Yeah, well, let's look at it here. Fairly hefty equity advantage for the pre-flop aggressor. You can see there. It's actually bigger in this case, 60-40, and they have way more super strong hands and way more good hands. And the big blind has way more weak hands. So what happens in this scenario, if we look at the flop strategy, obviously there's going to be absolutely no leads. And then the hijack with their massive range advantage. This actually looks quite similar. Remember, these were the two sizes that were used as well. And this is something that people definitely get wrong. They look at a board like this and they go, oh, this is very, very draw heavy, need to bet big. But like when you bet big, you don't give the guy a difficult decision. He just folds. He gets to fold all the trash that's in his range, and that's most of his range. So the strategy is still to use one of these smaller sizes. So if we stick with the bet 20% style thing and they call, and then let's say we get a brick on the turn. So we'll make it the 2 of clubs. And now we do the range by range comparison. You can see the ranges have moved way closer together, and actually they cross over at different points. Towards the bottom of the range, the big blind actually has more strong hands.
Yeah, because the big blind has got rid of all their
big blind has folded all their trash. Exactly. Now, some they still have trash in the range because all of the draws have missed.
Yeah.
So most of the trash comes from the draws that they check called trash and weak hands, and big blind, sorry, hijack has lots of the super strong hands. Yet they haven't capped their range in any way yet. But they have a lot of weak hands and trash. Over half their range now is weak hands and trash, and they actually don't have too much. This is the category they have the least amount of good hands, which are the hands you would typically want to just check or bet small with. So if you go back to strategy, if we go back to strategy, big blind is going to pure check, and now the hijack is going to use bigger sizings than we saw in the previous example. They're predominantly going to use 45.6%, but they're going to do a lot of checking too, because all of those good and weak hands don't necessarily want to put more money in now.
Right.
But some of the but the really strong stuff does, and it's targeting the fact that the it's playing against essentially a condensed range. Because if we go back to the flop, facing the 20% bet, there's a decent amount of raising. If we add up all of these raises here, that's 11%, 12%, 15%. So almost 17% of the time, there's going to be raises, and they are going to be the stronger hands like Jack 10, etc. Which some of them are going to be draws as well, but some of the draws are getting check called. So if we take Jack 10 out of their range, and some other stuff as well, then their range is capped going to the turn, and they have very little stuff that improves on the 2. So essentially now it's become more a case of polar range versus condensed range, and that's why the strategy for the hijack is to use the 2 bigger sizes or check.
So would a card, instead of a 2 of clubs, would a card like a King of Hearts or something like that, would that be something that would keep the betting range small? Because that's kind of, I'd argue that the range of no, similar actually.
Well, yeah, you see more small bets. Look, this is actually the size that's used the most, 31.3%. These 2 sizes, this size is used a lot less. More interesting card would be maybe a 7. Let me just look quickly at a 7. Because there'll be a lot of 9x in the big blinds range. The big blind starts to do a little bit of leading now because it's 7's good card for their range. Yeah, and now you can see there's no big betting at all. And way more checking. So this is more a case of because the big blind's no longer condensed. He's improved to straights in some cases here.
Yeah. We still want to have a value range, so we make that value range quite small. Betting.
Yeah. No, we do still, like, if we compare the equity of the 2 ranges, well, actually the equities run quite close, but actually still the hijack has more best hands and good hands, but way more trash as well.
Yeah.
So, but you can see that in terms of the graphs, the lines are actually running very close together. So again, back to sort of, we're just pushing equity. We have a stronger range. We want to bet, get called by a slightly weaker hand. So it makes sense to bet smaller.
Right.
You had another example. Let me just get it up. So in this example, let's have a look. It's the same 40 big blinds effect. If hijack opens big blind defense, we get the old 888 flop. I'm starting to suspect Barry has a new secret sponsor now. This is going to, I imagine this is just a very high frequency, low bet board with a small bet board. Yeah, again, there's no checking. We're range betting on this. This is different from the previous one because this is a board where whoever was ahead pre-flop is likely still ahead. So in position gets the range bet, but they're using that small sizing. Although there is a bit of bigger betting as well, which we didn't see in the last example. If we do the range by range comparison, you can see it's actually quite striking just how far behind the big blind is. But then right at the end, there's a sudden surge up, and they actually pull ahead for a while because they have more
because they've got 8x. Yeah, they'll have 7-8 and 6-8 and 5-8 and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it's only a tiny part of the range, and that's the only part of the range where they suddenly pull ahead. So in this example, on the turn, if we get the jack of clubs again, what happens to the 2 ranges? Because there's been so much check folding on the flop, actually down at the bottom part of the range, the big blind has a range advantage because they've folded all their trash. And and they have the advantage at the top. So it's a curious graph. They have range advantage at the bottom and the top, and in the middle, the hijack, the pre-flop raiser, has range advantage. So if we split the strategy, big blind's going to auto check, and then there's going to be a lot of checking because we can't range bet because we don't have advantage across the whole range. And when we do bet, we're using the sort of interim sizing, and that kind of makes sense too, because if you go back to the ranges, essentially what we're doing is we want to bet these hands up here where we have range advantage, but we can't go too big because we don't have nutted advantage. But we have a significant advantage in this range, so we can kind of go, third pot, half pot, that sort of range, and that's what's driving the sizing there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I'm starting to realize that the graph at the bottom of the range charts is probably the most informative.
Yeah,
aspect
it is very much
it.
like because you can go granular and you can go look at individual hands, and these buckets are quite useful too. But actually, this kind of really gives you a snapshot of how the ranges stack up. I mean, you can kind of get it from this, that like, look how little good hands there are here compared to here. So you can see that when we're in this region here, sort of 50 to 70% equity, clearly there's a fairly hefty advantage for the hijack. But when we're down at trash, there's actually the big blind has less trash. So it's but in this region here, suddenly the advantage shifts because the hijack has less weak hands and more good hands. So that's this whole portion here. And when that's the case, when we're sort of betting the middle of the range, but a very wide middle, we're typically using not a very small size, but a smallish size, 30 to 50% type thing.
Yeah, it strikes me that the key to my question, just going back to the original question, is like, what situations do we bet small on two streets, rather than going for a larger size? It seems to be based on what's happening in the middle of the range. When we've got a polar range, we don't want to bet the middle of the range.
Yeah, when we got polar range, we want to bet the top of the range to a big size and the bottom of the range to bluff, and then we're probably going to play the middle of the range as a check. But when we have sort of like just reasonable range advantage across the entire range, which is generally the case on most boards, on the flop, we just kind of want to bet at a very high frequency, but a smaller size.
Yeah, because in both of our examples, we had the 8-8-8 flop and we had the 4-3-2 all hearts flop. In both examples, we are incentivized to bet the middle of our range both times, right?
So yeah, exactly. The fact that we're betting the middle of our range, yeah. But anytime we're betting the middle of our range, we don't want to be using a big sizing.
Because and I just need to articulate this to myself. So on an 8-8-8 flop, any value we have, we kind of want to bet because we're going to get called by king high, queen high, maybe. So we want to bet pocket twos, for example. And then on a 4-3-2 flop, although we hate it when, say, a heart comes in and we're scared of the hearts, blah, 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 we still want to bet pocket sixes, top pair, high cards that could be ahead of a draw, high cards that could make a pair. Yeah, okay, this is not making sense. So,
yeah, you can see you're exactly right. Like, we want to bet pocket twos here because we can get called by worse.
Yeah.
Pocket twos is mostly using 33% size. So if we use that, and when we do bet pocket twos, as you say, like, we're getting called by king highs, or even getting raised in some cases. We're getting called by queen highs. Some queen highs are getting some value. Nearly all the ace highs are calling. So yeah. So essentially, we're targeting weaker hands. Anytime you're targeting a lot of weaker hands or calls, which are value, you want to use a smaller size, because if you use a bigger size, they can all just fold.
Yeah.
But anytime you're targeting a condensed range of like good but not great hands, you want, and you have the polar range, you want to bet big because your value hands want to bet big and get as much value from them as possible. Make them make an uncomfortably big call, but your bluffs also want to go big and make them fold enough of that range. And you give them that difficult decision of how much of my range has to call. Now, when you're betting against somebody who has a condensed range, if you bet small, they can just call the entire range. And if you, but by betting big, by overbetting, you give them that difficult decision of, okay, well, I can't, if I fold all the time, their bluffs are printing, and if I call all the time, their value is printing. So now I have to decide how much of my range I have to call, and what are the best calls within that.
Do you have the last example? I sent you 3 examples.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I think I might want to try and talk this one out and see if I understand it in
Okay.
real time.
Okay.
That will be
yeah.
fun.
Let me get that one up.
Okay, so this is hijack big blind again.
Yeah, same stuff.
So I feel like I fully understand the reason for betting small on the flop here. So the big we have got all the really good aces, all the really good kings, all the really good queens. We've got all the sets. We've got Jack 10. So we got lots and lots of value here, and then obviously the big blind has got 6-2 and 4-8 and all the crap. So they're going to have to fold a lot. So we bet small because we got lots of value, and they've got lots and lots of misses. So we want to
look at this is such a dramatic difference. Like, look how far ahead the green line is over the entire range.
Yeah. Once again, to say what's just dawned on me, the middle part of our range is way ahead of the middle part of their range, so we want to bet.
Yeah, and even the bottom of our range is ahead of the bottom of their range. So
yeah, exactly. Okay,
like, how much trash they have? They have 54.1% trash. If you bet any big size, they can just fold all that stuff, and they can fold their weak hands.
And then you're just going to run into their Jack 10s when they've got it, and so on. So yeah, okay. So this makes perfect sense. So we bet small, and then just show me what. So we bet small.
We bet we can actually do some bigger betting as well, because we have some hands that kind of want to bet big, and the real ones that jump out are like ace jack, ace 10. Like, they want to bet big for 2 reasons: best hand right now but vulnerable, but also have very strong, can make super strong hands. Whereas aces is mostly using a smaller size because it doesn't have the same vulnerability.
Kings uses the bigger size because it's going to get called by ace x a lot.
Aces usually retains the current strength that it has across most runouts, whereas ace jack and ace 10 will get devalued on some cards and will get promoted on other ones. So they're using the bigger size more frequently. So actually, we're using quite a range of bets here. The one thing we're not doing is doing any checking or any tiny betting. The small size we're using is 33% because we can bet this across our range and still not be over bluffing, but we can even use the bigger sizes as well. With some, the bluffs also use the bigger size quite a bit. 8-6 suited, almost anything that folds is going to be better than that. So.
Yeah, and also I presume there's a mix of the bluffs, and it's just everything that's completely missed, and I presume
everything's completely mixed. So it's always worth when everything's completely mixed, just kind of focus on the stuff that's taking one action more than others. Like kings is betting big quite a lot. Why? Yeah. It unblocks ace x. So it can get it will, when aces bets really big, it's going to be hard for it to be called by anything worse than jack 10. Yeah. But kings can get called by lots of ace x. So it's betting big a lot as well. The worst bluffs are betting big because they really benefit from folds, and then hands like ace jack and ace 10 are betting at a high frequency too, because combination, their equity comes from kind of 2 places. Best hand right now a lot, but devalued on a lot of turn cards, but also improves to a real monster on some turn cards. So then on the turn, do you want to talk to the turn?
Sorry, I just want to see what the big blind folds and raises out of curiosity.
Yeah, so the big blind response to, say, the 33% bet.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's similar stuff. So the ace jack and the ace 10 have got the same motivation to raise. Jack 10 for value, and then Jack X and 10X as the bluffs, which makes
Exactly. The
sense.
worst Jack X and 10X,
Um,
particularly
and then
the
obviously,
backdoor flush draws.
and then we've got rid of all the absolute junk. So and then so I picked Jack turn
Yeah.
again, which is interesting because in the two previous examples, the Jack club's turn didn't really change
It
anything
was
for the
kind of a
pre-flop
blank.
range. This really changes stuff for the pre-flop ranges, which is why I included it as an example because it went against what I was assuming was the. I at this point I'd assumed that the reason that you bet small was in my head I'd put it as because the turn hasn't changed much, which may end up still being true to an extent, but yeah. So let's look at the ranges.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, we're mostly we're using this like not tiny, but moderate, small size, let's call it 30 to 50, 33 to 55%. It should become clear if you look at the ranges, what's going on here. You can see that there's that down at the bottom of the range, big blind actually has range advantage. And so because of that, when we go back to strategy, when we go back to the hijack strategy, that whole part of the range wants to check because he's stronger there, but we're stronger in the other part of the range. But essentially what we're doing again is we're pushing equity. The ranges are quite close together. So we don't want to bet small. If we bet small, we're not charging him enough. He has a lot of pretty strong hands now that can call. But his range is still weaker than ours. We don't want to bet huge because we don't have a polar. Our strongest hands are not way stronger than his. He almost has as many of this category of hands here as we have. So because when the ranges are running closer together, that's a spot where you're essentially pushing equity, and you're not using over bets or big bets. You're using small bets. You're also not using tiny bets because tiny bets don't really make any sense. They don't charge him enough. But you have a lot of hands that want to check too. This whole part of the range here, you're actually at a range disadvantage. So you want to. Yeah, like it's literally the crossover point, 41%. That's the checking frequency.
Yeah. So once again, going back to my kind of eureka moment is you don't overbet here. And I mean, I still consider it to be. I just consider like 33 and 55% to be a relatively small size for a turn bet.
Small, yeah. If we were to agree on a nomenclature, I would categorize everything below 25 as tiny. Anything above that to up to around 2/3 pot as small.
Yeah, I agree.
Above that is big, and then anything over pot is overbet.
So to go back to my eureka moment, it's the middle of the range wants to bet again, which is why we bet small, quote unquote small, and not big, and but still check. Okay, this is now making perfect sense to me because again, what is the middle of our range here? It's going to be King X and Ace X, and they both still want to get. They both still bet somewhat for value, right?
Ace X in particular is going to be the middle of our range here.
Yeah. So we bet, for example, with Ace 6 off, which it's not as terrible a hand as it looks.
Ace 8 off. The lower hand is the hijack.
Oh right, sorry, yeah. Ace 8 off.
At this point, the graph, the 49% point, our hand is Ace 8 and Big Blind's hand is Ace 6. So you can see they're actually very close together.
Yeah. But neither of them has kicker problems on a board like this because the board's providing the kickers. So it's But yeah, so we still want to get value from Ace 8 here because we're probably going to get looked at by King X at least, right? What's the worst hand that calls?
Yeah, we can look at the let's go back to strategy and say when we bet 33%, let's say. Some a lot of King X is calling.
Yep.
And some of the weaker Queen X is calling. Well, that's probably flush draw. No, it's not. No, some of the weaker Queen X calls as well. It's interesting again. It's that it's the middle which is actually folding, whereas the Queen 4, Queen 3, Queen 2 are hanging on. That's to do with blocker effects.
Yep.
Of blocking bluffs. Yeah. All the Ace X is hanging on to the smaller size. a good amount of the king X and some of the queen X and some of the jack X. It's the same queen X and jack X as well. It's in this portion here, it's much more about blockers than actual value. Like a hand like queen 4 and queen 8 have roughly equivalent value, but queen 4 is obviously has better blocker characteristics.
Yeah. Ah, right, cool. Thank you. This has cleared something up. As I said, like I mean, to an extent, I think to go back to the original premise of this discussion, like I was betting too small on the turn in situations when I should have been betting bigger.
Yeah.
Although, in my defense, I felt this was somewhat of an exploit and node lock, just because, for example, a board would look very, very scary, and I just felt that my big hands would not get called against the actual players that I play against.
Yeah, typically you don't want to go big, but you don't want to go too small either.
No.
So yeah, that's sort of 33 to 60%, or 30 to 60% bet size. That's kind of the sweet spot of getting the most for your value, but not putting too much money in where your range advantage isn't actually that big.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is that next time that you and I do a video together, I will be waving my mouse cursor over that line graph like ridiculously, and it's my new best friend. That's actually, I've seen you use it a lot, but I haven't been using it at all to its full advantage, and that seems to be the best visual I can think of.
No, I think it's a really good. It's always a really good visual representation, and you can also kind of see the progress through a hand. Like you can see when the flop comes down, just what a massive range advantage the hijack.
Yeah.
But after it goes check bet call, and we get to the turn, that now it's actually how much is shifted. And I compare that picture to that picture, very different pictures. And and then when the hijack bets again, and it's back on the big blind, it changes again, because remember the hijack is betting sort of the middle of their range. So now they have more of that middle of range, and they're not betting the bottom of the range much at all. So once they have bet, we can kind of discount this part of the range quite a lot. But this part of the range is going to predominate.
Oh, excellent. Right, so I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you, Dara. That's
no problem.
I look forward to misapplying this at the tables this evening.
Yeah, every time you learn something new, there's another new gopher pops up. Now you're just going to be literally thinking, "What's the middle of my range? What's the middle of the range?"
Yeah, exactly.
I think you always have to think holistically, but you've identified a good heuristic, a good, very quick heuristic for turn strategy. Just think about what the middle of your range wants to do.
There you go. Cool. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Barry.